The morning mist clung to the Brecon beacons like a shroud, obscuring the struggling figures trudging through the Welsh mountains. 20 SAS candidates fought their way through the notorious selection course, each carrying Bergen packs weighted with 40 pounds of gear. Their faces, streaked with mud and exhaustion, showed the strain of the past 18 hours. That's when the sky split open. The cerulean tear in the clouds started small, barely noticeable against the gray Welsh morning. Within seconds, it expanded into a swirling vortex of ethereal light. Captain Derek Frost Winters, observing the candidates from his position near a weathered stone outcropping, immediately dropped to a prone position. 15 years of special operations experience had taught him to treat any anomaly as a potential threat. The massive ship that emerged from the vortex looked like something out of a science fiction film, all sleek lines and gleaming metal. It descended with impossible grace, hovering barely 100 meters above the training ground. The selection candidates had stopped moving, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten as they stared upward at the impossible sight. Primitive, a voice boomed across the landscape. As expected, the speaker materialized on a nearby hilltop in a shower of golden particles. The alien, there was no other word for it, stood nearly 7 feet tall, its crystalline armor reflecting the morning light in rainbow patterns. Behind it, 6 more figures appeared, each wearing similar but slightly less ornate armor. "I am Commander Kithrix of the Void Commandos, 1st Legion of the Galactic Confederation," the alien announced, its translated voice carrying an unmistakable tone of superiority. "We have been observing your planet's military capabilities. We are underwhelmed." Winters remained motionless, watching as Kithrix gestured toward the selection candidates. "This is what you consider training, carrying primitive containers through terrain, without even basic genetic enhancements or neural upgrades." As if to demonstrate their superiority, the Void Commandos began moving through the course. Their enhanced bodies made mockery of the challenging terrain. They leaped impossible distances, cleared obstacles with casual ease, and completed in minutes what would take human candidates hours. "Observe true military excellence," Thrix proclaimed, activating something in his armor. The alien commander sprinted up the steepest section of the mountain, moving faster than any Olympic athlete. His troops followed, their movements a blur of efficiency and enhanced power. But Winters noticed something they didn't. While the aliens blazed through the course with raw power and technology, they missed the subtle signs that made SAS selection more than just a physical challenge. They didn't notice how the candidates had automatically spread out to maintain optimal spacing, even while watching the display. They missed how 2 candidates had already disappeared into the undergrowth, maintaining tactical awareness even in their exhausted state. Most importantly, they failed to spot Winters himself, despite their supposedly superior sensors. "Your planet has been granted provisional membership in the Confederation," Kithrix announced upon returning, not even breathing hard. "However, your military forces are clearly inadequate for full participation in galactic defense. Perhaps in a few centuries, once you've embraced proper enhancement technology." "Permission to speak, sir." One of the candidates stepped forward, his voice carrying the distinct accent of Manchester. Thrix seemed amused. "Granted, primitive. If your enhancements are so superior," the candidate said, "how come you haven't spotted the operator who's been watching you from 50 meters to your left for the past 10 minutes? The alien commander's head snapped toward where Winters lay concealed. Despite their advanced technology, it took them several seconds to spot him in his ghillie suit, perfectly blended with the Welsh countryside. When Winters finally stood, his movement was so smooth it seemed almost casual. Mud and local vegetation had transformed him into a living piece of the landscape. He offered no greeting, no dramatic speech, just a quiet, professional nod that somehow carried more weight than all the aliens' grand proclamations. Kithrix's expression was unreadable behind his crystalline faceplate, but his voice carried a new note of uncertainty. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should conduct a more thorough evaluation." While the world erupted in chaos following first contact, Captain Winters did what he did best. He disappeared. As military delegations from every major power scrambled to impress the Void Commandos with demonstrations of their latest hardware, Winters began his own evaluation of Earth's visitors. The aliens had established their temporary base in an abandoned quarry 10 miles from Hereford. They'd chosen the location for its natural bowl shape, surrounding it with energy shields and sensor arrays that they claimed could detect a fly's wing beat at 5 kilometers. Kithrix had smugly informed Earth's military leaders that their primitive surveillance attempts would be futile. He never expected someone to simply walk in. On the first night, Winters crawled through a drainage culvert that the alien scans had dismissed as too small for any sentient being to navigate. He'd spent 3 hours moving the last 100 meters, timing his microscopic movements with the patterns of local wildlife he'd observed during the day. When a fox spooked some rabbits near the base perimeter, Winters used the natural disturbance to mask his final approach. Another data point confirmed, he whispered into his ancient dictaphone, his voice barely a breath. Their motion sensors calibrated for enhanced physiological signatures. Standard human movement at natural speeds registers as background fauna. The second night, he tested their thermal detection systems. After observing their patrol patterns, he identified a 7-second gap in their coverage. During that window, he slipped from his hide site and submerged himself in a shallow pool of quarry water, using a reed to breathe. The aliens' thermal imaging swept over him repeatedly, but their algorithms were programmed to ignore anything matching ambient temperature. Thermal sensors optimized for enhanced metabolic readings, he noted later, while warming himself in a concealed shelter. Standard infantry thermal blankets sufficient for concealment if properly employed. The third night proved the most illuminating. Winters infiltrated their motor pool by coating himself in lubricant from their own vehicles, effectively masking his biological signature. He spent 4 hours lying beneath one of their hovering transport craft, watching their maintenance procedures and listening to their conversations. "They're terrified of water," he recorded afterward. "Their enhanced muscle density makes them negatively buoyant. They've sacrificed adaptability for raw power." Dawn of the fourth day found Commander Kithrix in a foul mood. The Void Commandos had detected no surveillance attempts, but somehow detailed reports about their capabilities had appeared on the desk of Earth's military liaison. Even more infuriating, the reports were handwritten in immaculate penmanship on standard Ministry of Defense stationery. "Impossible." Kithrix raged, studying the security logs. "Our perimeter hasn't been breached. The sensors show nothing but local wildlife patterns." That's when one of his junior officers noticed something odd about those patterns. "Sir," the officer said, pulling up a holographic display, "the fox population in the area has increased by 1 over the past 3 nights." Kithrix frowned. "Meaning?" "The new fox moves. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Its movements exactly match known behavioral patterns, down to the millisecond." The realization hit Kithrix like a physical blow. Someone had studied the local wildlife so thoroughly that they could mimic their movements with absolute precision, using the animals' patterns as cover for their own infiltration. The commander rushed to the motor pool, where he found another handwritten note tucked into his personal transport's cockpit. The message was simple: "Who dares wins. Respectfully, Captain Winters, 22 Regiment." Kithrix stared at the note, then at his supposedly impregnable base. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of enhanced combat: uncertainty. In his private quarters, Winters reviewed his notes one final time. While the rest of Earth's military focused on matching the aliens' technological advantages, he'd confirmed what years of special operations had taught him. Technology was only as effective as its user's mindset. "Final assessment," he recorded. "Void Commandos have sacrificed their greatest potential asset, their original, unaugmented adaptability, in pursuit of standardized enhancement. They've forgotten the fundamental rule of warfare. The most dangerous weapon is the one you never see coming." He clicked off the dictaphone and began preparing for another night of observation. After all, The real evaluation was just beginning. The Galactic Confederation's announcement came during a rain-soaked morning at the United Nations. Representatives from Earth's military forces packed the assembly hall, their dress uniforms creating a sea of medals and ribbons. Captain Winters sat in the back, wearing a plain black suit that made him practically invisible among the gathered dignitaries. "The Crucible," Kithrix declared from the podium, his crystalline armor catching the light, "is our sacred testing ground. For 10,000 years, it has separated true warriors from mere soldiers." A hologram materialized above the assembly, showing a massive space station shaped like an elongated octahedron. 20 teams will enter. They must reach the central control room to prove their worth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the station's specifications appeared. 12 kilometers of corridors, automated defense systems, and environmental hazards. The hologram zoomed in to show combat robots patrolling sterile hallways, laser grids protecting key junctions, and entire sections exposed to the vacuum of space. "Observation of your forces has led us to a decision," Kithrix continued, his translated voice carrying a note of finality. "Earth's military units are deemed unsuitable for participation. Your unaugmented biology and primitive training methods would only result in unnecessary casualties." The assembly erupted in protests. American Delta Force operators stood up shouting. Russian Spetsnaz commanders demanded reconsideration. Chinese Special Forces representatives called for an immediate review. In the back of the hall, Winters quietly opened his worn leather journal and began writing. However, Kithrix raised a hand for silence. "Your provisional membership in the Confederation requires us to accept individual applications. Any single warrior who wishes to attempt the Crucible may submit their candidacy. Though I strongly advise against such futile gestures." The protests turned to scattered laughter. What single human could hope to compete against the galaxy's elite fighting forces? Winters stood, his movement so smooth that few noticed until he was already walking down the center aisle. He carried a single piece of paper, handwritten in his precise script. The assembly fell silent as he approached the podium. Kithrix accepted the application with barely concealed amusement. "Captain Winters, our surveillance systems have been interested in you since your activities at our base." The alien commander made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "You realize the Crucible was designed for enhanced beings. The environmental hazards alone would kill most humans." "Noted, sir," Winters replied, his voice carrying easily despite its quiet tone. "Permission to ask a question." "Granted. Does the station have maintenance crews?" Kithrix blinked his secondary eyelids in confusion. "Of course. The automated systems require regular." He stopped, remembering the reports about his base's security breach. "This is different, Captain. The Crucible is not some primitive military base. It is the pinnacle of Confederation combat engineering. Everything needs maintenance, sir," Winters replied with a slight nod. "Everything has a rhythm, a pattern, even pinnacles." The alien commander studied the human before him. Gone was the mud-covered figure from the Welsh mountains, but somehow this quiet man in a plain suit seemed even more dangerous. "Your application is accepted," Kithrix declared, if only to demonstrate the gap between human and enhanced capabilities. As Winters turned to leave, Kithrix added, "The Crucible begins in 3 weeks. Competitors may bring only standard military equipment. No powered armor. No enhancement implants." "Understood, sir." Winters paused. "Will there be a briefing on the station's layout?" "Minimal information only. The Crucible tests adaptation as much as combat skill." A ghost of a smile crossed Winters' face. "Perfect." Later that evening, in his sparse London flat, Winters laid out his equipment. No exotic weapons, no cutting-edge technology, just proven tools. A combat knife, climbing gear, and the same reliable sidearm he'd carried for 15 years. Next to them, he placed his journal and a pencil. "Time to study," he whispered to himself, opening his laptop to search for publicly available space station maintenance protocols. After all, the crucible might be alien, but physics was universal. And where there were maintenance crews, there were maintenance shafts. The real challenge wouldn't be surviving the station's hazards. It would be making the galaxy's elite warriors realize that true combat excellence had nothing to do with enhancement, and everything to do with understanding the fundamentals. The Confederation transport ship hummed quietly as it carried the competitors toward the crucible. In the vessel's preparation bay, 19 teams of enhanced warriors checked their weapons and adjusted their armor. Holographic displays showed them running combat simulations, their movements a blur of superhuman speed. Captain Winters sat cross-legged in a corner, drinking tea from a battered metal cup. "You mock our sacred challenge with your inaction," a towering warrior from the Andromedan Special Forces growled, his cybernetic eyes glowing with irritation. "While we prepare, you waste time with primitive beverages." Winters glanced up from his cup. "Not drinking tea," he said quietly. "Having tea with Specialist Zhang." The Andromedan warrior blinked in confusion, finally noticing the elderly Chinese man sitting across from Winters. Zhang wore the simple gray coveralls of the Crucible's maintenance staff. 3 decades on similar stations, Winters explained, nodding respectfully to Zhang. Fascinating stories about ventilation system maintenance in zero gravity. The enhanced warrior snorted and walked away. Behind him, Zhang smiled knowingly and continued his detailed explanation of how the station's waste recycling systems operated during combat lockdowns. Over the next week, as other competitors ran virtual combat drills, Winters had tea with 15 different maintenance workers. He spoke with waste management technicians, environmental systems operators, and power grid specialists. Each conversation was meticulously documented in his journal, accompanied by rough sketches and timing notes. "Your human friend is strange," a maintenance supervisor told Kithrix during a routine report. He asked about the frequency of atmosphere recycling in the lower levels, about backup power protocols, about waste heat dispersal patterns. Kithrix dismissed the concerns. Let him gather his trivial data. The Crucible's combat systems will eliminate him within the first hour. But on the final day of preparation, something caught the commander's attention. He was reviewing security footage when he noticed Winters in a seemingly one-sided conversation. "Station's got a rhythm," the human operator was saying to an empty corridor. "Like a heartbeat. Maintenance crews feel it. Even the enhanced warriors feel it, though they don't realize it. The way the artificial gravity pulses every 6 hours when the systems recalibrate. The slight temperature drop in Section 8 during power grid transitions." Kithrix leaned closer to the screen. Who is he talking to? The security officer adjusted the sensors. There, nearly invisible against the wall, was a small cleaning drone, one of thousands that maintained the station's pristine corridors. "Appreciate the conversation," Winters was saying to the drone. "Your repair route gives you the best view of the station's daily cycles. Better than any briefing." For the first time since the competition began, Kithrix felt a twinge of unease. The night before the Crucible began, the competitors gathered for final equipment checks. Enhanced warriors proudly displayed their advanced weaponry: pulse rifles, plasma generators, and neural disruptors. Each item was carefully approved under the standard military equipment rules, pushing the definition to its limit. Winters placed his gear on the inspection table: a knife, a pistol, 50 meters of rappelling line, and a small medical kit. The inspection officer, clearly confused, checked each item against regulations. "This is all?" the officer asked. "Plus these," Winters added, placing down a pack of cable ties and a roll of duct tape. The enhanced warriors burst out laughing. Even Kithrix couldn't suppress his amusement. "Captain," he said, "you realize the Crucible's defensive systems include military-grade combat robots." "Yes, sir," Winters replied, carefully wrapping the duct tape around his wrist like a bracelet. "But robots need maintenance access. Everything does." As the laughter continued, Winters made one final entry in his journal. It was a quote from an old SAS instructor: "Speed is fine, But patience is final. The quick warrior strikes once and fails. The patient warrior strikes once and succeeds. He closed the journal and tucked it into his chest pocket. Tomorrow, the galaxy's elite warriors would learn that true combat mastery wasn't about enhancement or advanced weapons. It was about understanding the battlefield itself, every rhythm, every pattern, every hidden access panel that the cleaning drones use daily. The Crucible was about to get a lesson in the fundamentals of warfare, taught by a man armed with nothing but patience, observation, and a roll of duct tape. The Crucible began with a symphony of destruction. Enhanced warriors burst from their starting positions like living missiles, their advanced weapons filling the station's corridors with plasma fire and energy pulses. Combat robots collapsed by the dozens, torn apart by superhuman strength and bleeding-edge technology. Winters didn't move from his starting position. Competitor 19 appears to be malfunctioning, an observer reported to Kethrix. No movement detected. The commander checked the feed showing Winters sitting calmly in his insertion pod, eyes closed. Frozen in fear, perhaps. Not unexpected for an unenhanced. Kethrix stopped mid-sentence. Where did he get those ear protectors? Before anyone could answer, the station's power grid experienced its scheduled 6-hour recalibration. The lights flickered for precisely 1.3 seconds, standard procedure, barely noticeable to enhanced warriors designed to operate in darkness. When the lights returned, Winters was gone. "Track him," Kethrix barked. Unable to comply, the observer responded. No biological signatures matching his profile on any sensors. The first sign of Winters' presence came 30 minutes later. The Andromedan team, advancing through a maintenance sector, found their enhanced strength suddenly working against them. The artificial gravity in their section began fluctuating wildly, a 20-second pattern that exactly matched the maintenance cycle Zhang had mentioned over tea. Warning: environmental anomaly detected, their armor systems reported, moments before the gravity shifted from 0 to triple Earth normal. The warriors, unable to compensate quickly enough, slammed into the deck plates. Their enhanced muscles, designed for explosive power, pulled against their own mass with bone-crushing force. 2 decks above, the Centaurian razors encountered a different problem. Their advanced motion sensors detected multiple human signatures approaching from all directions. They opened fire, only to realize they were shooting at reflections created by precisely angled maintenance panels, panels that would normally be cleaned by the small drone Winters had befriended. "This is impossible," their leader transmitted. "The human can't be in all these locations at once." He isn't, Kethrix realized, watching the chaos unfold. He's using the station itself as a weapon. The station's automated defense systems began behaving erratically. Combat robots would suddenly power down, their maintenance override codes somehow activated. Laser grids meant to protect sensitive areas would redirect without warning, their targeting protocols rewritten by someone intimately familiar with their cleaning and calibration schedules. In Section 8, during the predicted temperature drop, 3 teams found themselves trapped in a corridor rapidly filling with fire suppression foam. As they struggled to move through the thick substance, station cameras caught a glimpse of a figure in simple black fatigues moving through a nearby maintenance shaft, one that, according to maintenance logs, would be accessing its cleaning systems at exactly that time. "Clever bastard," Kethrix muttered, beginning to understand. He's not fighting the station systems, he's working with them. The Void Commandos elite team pressed forward, determined to prove their superiority. They encountered no resistance, no traps, no signs of human interference. Their confidence grew with each unopposed step. Then they entered a section marked for routine atmospheric cycling. "Sir," their point man reported, "sensors detect trace amounts off." The transmission cut off as emergency bulkheads slammed shut. Through the reinforced windows, Kethrix watched in horror as the section filled with cleaning gases. Non-lethal, but the Void Commandos' enhanced respiratory systems, designed to filter toxins, began automatically purging their oxygen supplies. By the time they restored communications, they found a handwritten note stuck to the window with a piece of duct tape. Enhanced lungs. Bigger oxygen requirement. Longer recovery time needed. Best regards, Winters. 5 hours into the crucible, 13 of the 19 enhanced teams had been eliminated. Not by combat, not by superior technology, but by their own assumptions about how warfare should work. They had prepared to fight an enemy. Instead, they found themselves battling the very systems they took for granted. And somewhere in the station's arterial network of maintenance tunnels, a single human operator continued his methodical advance, armed with nothing but patience, understanding, and intimate knowledge of how everything, even the most advanced space station, needed its quiet, routine maintenance. The real game was just beginning. 6 hours into the crucible, the station's middle levels had become a psychological warfare zone. The remaining enhanced teams found themselves jumping at shadows, their augmented senses working overtime to detect a threat that seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere. "He's turned the whole bloody station into a kill house," muttered Kithrix, watching the feeds. The commander had seen enough SAS training documentation to recognize the similarity to their close-quarters battle training facilities. But Winters had taken the concept to an impossible scale. The Arcturus Phantoms, renowned stealth specialists, learned this lesson the hard way. Their chameleonic armor, capable of bending light, proved useless when Winters flooded their section with superheated steam from the thermal regulation systems. Their enhanced thermal signatures blazed like beacons through the artificial fog. "Contact," their leader shouted, firing at a human-shaped heat signature. The plasma bolt passed through empty air, hitting a cleverly positioned piece of heated maintenance equipment. "Basic thermodynamics," came Winters' voice through their comm system, hijacked through a maintenance terminal. "Heat signatures can be created. Even enhanced vision can be fooled by fundamental physics." The Phantoms spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. That's when Winters triggered the emergency cooling system. The rapid temperature change sent their armor's adaptive camouflage into cascade failure. 3 decks below, the Sirius Warborn encountered a different kind of hell. Their enhanced hearing picked up what seemed to be human movement from multiple directions. But Winters had spent hours studying the station's acoustic properties with the maintenance crews, learning how sound traveled through its ventilation systems. Their recording of maintenance drones, one warrior realized too late, played through different. His voice trailed off as a new sound filled the corridor, a precise frequency that interacted with their auditory enhancements in devastating ways. The Warborn fell to their knees, their enhanced senses overwhelmed by what was, to normal human hearing, nothing more than a quiet hum. "You rely too much on your enhanced hearing," Winters' voice echoed, somehow perfectly clear through the cacophony. "Sometimes the oldest tricks work best." Thrix watched in growing concern as team after team fell victim to their own sophisticated capabilities. The human wasn't just exploiting weaknesses. He was systematically demonstrating how each enhancement could become a liability. The Void Commandos secondary team pushed forward, determined to restore their honor. They activated their neural combat networks, linking their minds for perfect tactical coordination. That's when the lights began to strobe. "Maintenance warning," announced the station's eye, conducting emergency illumination test sequence. The strobing perfectly matched the refresh rate of their neural interfaces. The enhanced warriors stumbled, their shared consciousness overwhelmed by synchronized visual input they couldn't filter out. "Pattern recognition," Winters' voice came through their neural link. "Standard emergency test sequence. Pages 242 to 245 of the maintenance manual. Required monthly by Confederation safety protocols." One by one, they collapsed, their own neural networks overloaded by perfectly timed light pulses designed to help maintenance crews identify faulty fixtures. In the control center, Kithrix received a handwritten note through the pneumatic message system used by maintenance crews. "Enhancement is a force multiplier, but it also multiplies vulnerabilities. Simple solutions often work best. Respectfully, Winters." The commander crumpled the note, finally understanding. The human hadn't turned the station into a weapon. He'd revealed that it had always been one. Every system, every protocol, every routine maintenance procedure could become a tactical advantage or disadvantage. The enhanced warriors had trained to overcome any enemy, but they'd never considered that the battlefield itself might be their greatest opponent. As the remaining teams regrouped, trying to adapt their tactics, Winters continued his methodical progress through the station's maintenance arteries. He demonstrated that their enhancements could be turned against them. Now came the harder lesson, showing them what pure human ingenuity, stripped of technological crutches, could accomplish. The station's heart lay ahead, and with it, a lesson about the true nature of combat excellence that would reshape galactic military doctrine forever. 7 hours into the crucible, only 3 teams remained. The Void Commandos' primary team, a lone survivor from the Orion Vanguard, and Captain Winters. The station's central control room lay just 2 sectors ahead, but the path between had become a no-man's land of uncertainty. Enough games. Commander Cathrix's voice boomed through the station's comm system. Face us directly, human. Prove your worth in actual combat. In response, the maintenance access panel behind the Void Commandos' rear guard quietly slid open. Very well, Winters said, stepping into view. He looked exactly as he had at the start. Clean black fatigues, basic gear, and that roll of duct tape still wrapped around his wrist. No signs of exertion, no battle damage. Just calm, professional readiness. The Void Commandos wheeled around, their enhanced reflexes bringing weapons to bear with superhuman speed. But Winters was already moving. Engaging siege protocols. The station's AI announced, its timing synchronized perfectly with Winters' movement. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, splitting the Void Commandos into pairs. Each isolated section began implementing its own emergency procedure, all perfectly normal maintenance routines that Winters had studied over tea. This is your superior combat doctrine. The Void Commando lieutenant sneered, his enhanced muscles easily absorbing the recoil as he fired a burst of plasma. Hiding behind automated systems, Winters didn't bother responding. He was already gone, ducking into a maintenance shaft that, according to the elderly technician Zhang, would be cycling its atmospheric scrubbers exactly 7 hours and 13 minutes into any combat scenario. The pressurized burst of recycled air launched him forward at precisely the right moment to emerge behind the lieutenant. Before the enhanced warrior could react, Winters had used his own duct tape to secure the warrior's plasma rifle to its power pack, a simple mechanical solution that the weapon's safety protocols never considered possible. What are you doing?" the lieutenant demanded, trying to clear the malfunction. "Improvising," Winters replied, already disappearing into another access panel. "Something enhancement can't teach." Through the station's cameras, Cathrix watched in growing amazement as Winters systematically dismantled the galaxy's elite warriors, not through superior strength or speed, but through an intimate understanding of their psychological dependencies on enhancement. When the Orion Vanguard survivor attacked with quantum-linked blades, Winters simply triggered the corridor's waste disposal suction. The enhanced warrior, too focused on his weapon's energy signatures, failed to notice his feet leaving the ground until he was halfway to the recycling plant. The Void Commando's close combat specialist found her neural-enhanced martial arts useless when Winters flooded the compartment with enough cleaning foam to turn every movement into a slow-motion battle against viscosity. Her enhanced strength only made her sink faster. "You're not even fighting us," the last Void Commando realized, watching Winters appear and disappear through maintenance access points that somehow always opened at exactly the right moment. "You're conducting an operation. War isn't about fighting," Winters replied, his voice coming through the warrior's own comm unit. "It's about achieving objectives, something your enhancements made you forget." The final confrontation came in a corridor leading to the control room. The remaining Void Commandos had sealed all maintenance access points, forced Winters into what they thought would be direct combat. "No more tricks," Cathrix announced, personally leading his remaining warriors. No more hiding in the walls. Face us as a warrior. Winters stood calmly at the end of the corridor, hands empty. You still don't understand, he said quietly. I never hid. You just forgot how to see. He reached up and pressed a single button on a manual fire control panel, the kind that enhanced warriors, dependent on their neural interfaces, would never think to use. The corridor's temperature plummeted as fire suppressant gases filled the space. The Void Commandos' enhanced respiratory systems, designed to filter toxins, automatically began purging their oxygen reserves. Their augmented muscles, requiring massive amounts of oxygen, began to falter. One by one, they realized that their own enhancements were suffocating them. The true weapon, Winters said, walking past their struggling forms while wearing the simple rebreather from his basic medical kit, was your reliance on enhancement. You forgot how to be warriors first, and enhanced beings second. The path to the control room lay open, and with it, a lesson about warfare that would echo through the galaxy. True combat mastery came not from enhancement, but from understanding the fundamental nature of conflict itself. The control room's doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Captain Winters stepped inside, still carrying nothing more sophisticated than his basic gear and that now half-used roll of duct tape. Behind him, medical teams rushed to assist the unconscious enhanced warriors, their mighty augmentations rendered useless by fundamental tactics older than spaceflight itself. Simulation complete, the station's AI announced. Single victor confirmed. Captain Derek Winters, Earth Special Air Service. In the observation chamber, Q-Thrix stood motionless, watching as Winters began methodically writing in his worn journal. The human hadn't just won. He had systematically deconstructed every assumption about enhanced warfare that the Confederation had developed over millennia. Your report, Captain. Q-Thrix asked through the comm system, his voice carrying a new note of respect. Winters closed his journal and looked directly into the observation window. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. The Crucible isn't a test of combat excellence, Winters said quietly. It's a test of adaptation. Every team that entered today brought overwhelming force, enhanced capabilities, and advanced technology. They all made the same mistake, thinking that superior attributes guarantee superior results. He placed his journal on the control room's main console. I've documented 37 critical vulnerabilities in enhanced combat doctrine, 74 potential countermeasures that require nothing more sophisticated than basic tools and fundamental tactical principles, and 112 ways that environmental factors can turn enhancement into a liability. The silence that followed was profound. In the observation chamber, military leaders from across the galaxy stared at their readouts in disbelief. Every engagement, every tactic, every improvised solution had been meticulously documented and analyzed. You've effectively destroyed 10,000 years of combat doctrine, Q-Thrix said finally. No, sir, Winters replied. I've reminded you of what it was supposed to be. Enhancement should complement warrior instincts, not replace them. Your forces are physically superior in every way, but they've forgotten the fundamental truth of warfare. The deadliest weapon is the mind that understands how to use whatever tools are available. Q-Thrix was silent for a long moment. Then, the Confederation's military council will want a full briefing. Already prepared, sir. Winters pointed to his journal, along with recommendations for integrating traditional tactical training with enhancement protocols. The goal isn't to abandon advancement, but to ensure it builds upon fundamental combat principles rather than replacing them. The aftermath of the Crucible sent shockwaves through the galaxy's military establishment. Training programs were revamped. Enhancement protocols were redesigned to preserve and augment basic warrior instincts rather than override them. Special forces across the Confederation began studying Earth's military history, discovering centuries of innovation born from necessity rather than technological superiority. 6 months later, Q-Thrix stood before the first class of a new training program. Enhanced warriors from across the galaxy waited expectantly as their former commander, now chief instructor, activated the briefing screen. Lesson 1, he announced, displaying an image of Winter's worn journal and roll of duct tape. Enhancement is not excellence. Excellence is understanding that every environment, every tool, every limitation can become an advantage. Today, you will begin learning warfare as it was meant to be taught, from the ground up. In his office at Hereford, Winters added a final note to his journal, a quote from an old SAS instructor. "The warrior who relies on strength will be defeated by technique. The warrior who relies on technique will be defeated by strategy. The warrior who understands all three becomes unstoppable." He closed the journal and prepared for his next class. The Void Commandos elite team had arrived for their first day of SAS selection. They had come not as enhanced beings seeking to demonstrate superiority, but as warriors seeking to understand the foundations of true combat mastery. In the end, the Crucible had taught the galaxy's greatest warriors a lesson as old as combat itself. Technology and enhancement were tools, not solutions. True excellence came from understanding the basics, adapting to circumstances, and never forgetting that the greatest weapon in any warrior's arsenal was the ability to think beyond their advantages. The age of the enhanced warrior had not ended. It had simply been reminded of where true combat mastery begins.